Friends and relatives should always be extremely alarmed when someone enters a coma. The fact that their loved one is still alive gives the family some comfort, but the individual is unresponsive and there's a significant possibility that their body and mind might give out at any time. However, in rare occasions, a miracle occurs and a person emerges from a coma. For whatever reason, their bodies start working again when their minds recover control. Readjusting to their previous way of life takes some time, but everyone they know is greatly relieved. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. An article from 2007 in the Polish newspaper Gazeta Dzieldaowska described the tale of Jan Grzyzewski, a railroad worker who had a serious brain injury in 1988 and went into a coma. The report claims that Jan was unconscious in a hospital bed for 19 years before realizing that his surroundings had changed drastically. However, the real account of Jan Grzyzewski's ordeal is much more bizarre. A coma is among the most terrifying outcomes of a brain injury. The brain is not dead, but it is not responding to any outside inputs, and there is a good risk that it will shut down at any time. People do, however, survive under these circumstances. Only a few years ago, a tale about this same event shocked a whole family in Poland. A report from 2007 in the Polish daily Gazeta Dzieldaowska claims that in 1988, Jan Grzyzewski, a railway worker, had a brain injury that left him in a severe coma. The article stated at the time that medical professionals didn't think he would ever fully recover. But according to the paper's story in the same 2007 piece, Jan had eventually emerged from what turned out to be a 19-year coma, and the world had changed significantly from when he had left it. This tale took off like wildfire. News organizations took it up, and television reports continued to spread it. The public was astonished to learn that a guy had woken up from an almost 2-decade-long coma to discover a very different world. Newspapers and television programs saw parallels between the purportedly true narrative and the script of the 2003 film Goodbye Lenin. In the movie, an old pro-communist mother of a family in East Berlin wakes up from a coma in 1990 and tries to hide the fall of the Berlin Wall and East German communism from her. The fact that Jan had 4 children when he went into a coma was another astounding detail that was revealed. He awoke to find that he had 11 grandkids. It was said that Jan had a large extended family to get to know. Despite how bizarre that all sounded, the news kept covering it. Another sector that saw enormous advancements while Jan was unresponsive was technology. He was cited as stating, "Now I see people on the streets with mobile phones, and there are so many goods in the shops, it makes my head spin," in a Polish television interview. He was also reported in the Daily Telegraph as adding, "The only things in the stores when I lapsed into a coma were tea and vinegar. There were massive gasoline lines everywhere, and meat was rationed." He had woken up to a world full with riches. It was nearly too much for his comprehension. Jan was reportedly in a coma for 19 years, and Gertruda, his devoted wife, was his primary caregiver. Despite medical professionals' predictions that Jan would not survive more than a few years on life support, she stuck at his side the entire time. Talking about the pain Jan's coma caused her, Gertruda spoke with the Polish television station. "I cried a lot and I prayed a lot," she declared. "People who visited us frequently inquired, 'When will he pass away?' However, he is still alive." It was unknown to Gertruda if her dear husband would ever be aware again. People were enthralled with the touching tale of Jan's extraordinary voyage from all around the world. But when the Guardian newspaper chose to go a bit more for additional information, several facts started to emerge as inconsistent. At that point, the most shocking revelation was revealed to the enthralled readers. While Jan's narrative wasn't wholly made up, many of the specifics were. However, who was it that the reporter for The Guardian spoke with and who acknowledged all of these lies? It was Jan, the one and only. "I never said any of those things," Jan stated in an interview with the reporter. "I wasn't unconscious for 19 years. I only talked to one journalist and their reporting was inaccurate. New details surfaced with each printing of the story." The moment Jan revealed this, the reporter was taken aback. Everything changed. Jan admitted to the reporter that, contrary to what news outlets had reported, His 1988 head injury had only left him in a coma for 4 years. He was confined to a wheelchair ever since he woke up from Jan, then refuted the whole "Goodbye London" aspect of his statement with his 4-year journey. Contrary to claims, he had not gone into a coma in one world and woke up in a totally other one. Everything they said I hadn't seen, I saw. I saw my grandkids and watched the news on TV, so even though I couldn't always explain myself, Jan told The Guardian. These recent advancements piqued my interest. The newspaper that first published his tale, for whatever reason, was attempting to make a big issue out of something that wasn't quite as weird as it first appeared to be. Wojciech Strogowski, Jan's physician, even verified the updated information. He acknowledged that Jan had not been in a coma for the whole 19 years that he had been incapacitated. Gertrude, for her part, somewhat agreed with her husband's account of what happened. "Jan was not in a coma," she stated to The Guardian. "Everything I said to him was comprehended by him. He first communicated with me by showing me his face when he wanted anything to eat or drink. He said something later, it seems, that Jan had only had conversations with one Polish journalist, who inflated the facts of his case based on his account. So who was it that disseminated this made-up tale over the globe?" The response was not too unexpected. The incorrect information was disseminated by a reporter for the newspaper Gazeta Jeleniogorska. When The Guardian contacted Malgorzata Kruwinska, the paper's top editor, regarding the report, she responded right away, saying, "It's not a lie. The issue is that comas come in a variety of forms." This was a very puzzling response, and it was not her only comment. The editor-in-chief added, "There is a kind of coma where people are unconscious, and others where they wake up from time to time and then fall back into a coma. This was the case with Jan Brzezinski." The editor also said that even if Jan's coma had lasted only 4 years, there were still dramatic changes in Poland during that time. Jan and Gertrude are still very much in love, and although the truth about his story was much different from what had been published, one thing was certain. Gertrude still spent nearly 2 decades caring for her disabled husband. Jan's notoriety drastically decreased once the real tale came to light, but he didn't care because he still had his health and his beloved wife by his side. Thus, while Jan's narrative might not have been as noteworthy as everyone believed, the backstory is definitely not something that is published on a daily basis. Even though everything was made up, it was still really interesting. Her faith allowed her to accomplish the seemingly impossible, leaving her son Toby behind in hopes of a brighter tomorrow. A kid called Daniel was born on the waterfront of Puerto Ogarrios in remote Jamaica at the beginning of 1997, precisely in the month of February. That boy was born and raised close to one of the world's most outstanding and representative moms, who gave him very strong encouragement and unwavering care. It was a woman named Inez. That child's father abandoned him when he was only an embryo, so he was born and reared without any parental contact. In that lovely and strange port, the woman didn't have any family. They had to head out, not knowing where they would end up, given the situation. The mother went to that location to get assistance for herself and her kid, and they remained in one of the woman's brother's homes. He treated her with great kindness, understanding that she had experienced a very trying period. She carried deep scars on her spirit from what had to transpire at that harbor. For the only reason that she had someone to fight for, she continued to fight after meeting this woman recently. The man married her after a few years. Even though Inez knew it was time to go, she couldn't think of anything better to give Daniel, so she took him for a stroll in the park they went to every morning, just as the sun was beginning to rise. She informed him at that park that he would travel to Europe, a very far-off place. Daniel was not really clear about what was going on. He didn't see any issues. In fact, he was looking forward to getting to know yet another nation and continent. With laughter, tears, and love in every moment, they played for the entire afternoon. That day, she had a message for her little son, Daniel, that she believed would shatter his heart as it had already crushed hers. The following day, she intended to go. They saw a tiny puppy that was famished and whimpering as they were strolling, and she was trying to figure out how to notify the little one. They saw as onlookers assaulted him and hurled trash at him. Using what little she had, Inez chose to purchase a succulent piece of steak. The unfortunate puppy was carried by her, and she and her son brought it to the park and took care of it in front of Daniel and the throng. The sad, tiny puppy was fed by them. Inez assured Daniel that even in his loneliness, she would always look out for him. She would eventually take care of him and shower him with affection. She would always be there where he was. Inez informed Daniel that she was going at that very moment in order to further their mutual benefit. "Dear boy, I have held you in my arms ever since I witnessed your little lungs expand and produce their first breath. It was only the two of us when I was permitted to leave that chilly hospital. I held you up to the sky and firmly declared, 'Father, I will name my little son Daniel as one of your most obedient children. Please look after him for me. Father, I want you to take the lead. Additionally, I want you to look after him while I'm not there or unable to see him.' I also told him, 'Daniel, you are fortunate to have a heavenly Father who is the best of all, even though you do not have a physical father. This time, Daniel, I would want to remind you that your uncle will help you in whatever way you need it, and that you will be taken care of by the great being from above in heaven. Recall that it will only last a little while, and I will see you again as soon as I can. It will probably happen in a year.' Daniel's desired dog was brought home with the mother and boy, but Uncle Raphael didn't want a pet since he was getting married shortly, and pets required a lot of care. Uncle Raphael gave in to Daniel's insistence, but only on the proviso that the four-legged acquaintance would go once winter arrived. Daniel nodded grudgingly. As night fell, Inez put tiny Daniel to sleep. Inez kissed him on the forehead as the cuckoo clock chimed and walked away. When Daniel awoke, his mother had already departed, despite his frantic and exhaustive searches for her. Yes, the dog Daniel dubbed Toby provided him with comfort. He had a four-legged friend. It was 2 months later. Aunt Isabella wed Uncle Raphael. She was a bit antsy and she felt extremely uneasy witnessing the chaos that little Toby had produced when she got to Uncle Raphael's house. Uncle Raphael gave in to her demands and established a boundary. Daniel sobbed uncontrollably because Toby was all he had left of his mother Inez. After entering his room, he peered out the window. It was indeed there, perched on a stone. Raphael murmured to tiny Toby, and the dog became thrilled and sprang out the window. Unfortunately, the window was too high for him to climb back in, and Toby was only 5 months old, a puppy of a Chinese breed that was quite similar to Zetu, a little dog. Daniel went to the park every day, as he had promised, to wait for the sun to set in order to remember his mother. Yes, tiny Toby, the one memory he had, was always with him. He left his obedient little pal at the door and went into Uncle Raphael's home that evening when they arrived. With much contempt, Aunt Isabella said, "You can't come at such late hours when your uncle is working. Here, I'm the one in command." Daniel bolted to his room after receiving a severe reprimand from her. "I promised my mom that I would go every day, every time the sun goes down, and I will not break my promise," he sobbed to himself. Later, he woke up when everyone else was asleep because he could not sleep due to the extreme cold. He went very gently to the door to check on his devoted pal. He was trembling from the cold. "Please don't make noise," muttered Daniel as he opened the door. "I can't leave you outside even if I don't want to upset Aunt Isabella and Uncle Raphael. My buddy, you're quite chilly. I could get you in with my parents." Daniel saw that tiny Toby would always make painful movements when he moved while he was lying on his bed, since Daniel could hardly fit in it. That bed wasn't big enough for anyone else. His helpful mother's most treasured memory was of Toby. Then Daniel wrapped Toby in his arms and walked carefully to the floor, where he passed out that evening. He hoped nobody would notice Toby's presence the following day. He finished his tasks fast so he could meet Toby, leaving half of his meal for the dog. In that small chamber, he cautiously and silently waited for him. Aunt Isabella had little Daniel perform a lot of duties that she herself did not want to do every time Uncle Raphael departed. Uncle Raphael never took Daniel's explanation seriously and made Daniel appear dishonest since he thought Isabella was cute. After 4 months, Daniel was still in mourning over his mother's passing. She'd said she would be back in a year. Daniel's body ached from the chilly floor, but he was too poor to sleep in that tiny bed since Toby the dog was the finest gift his mother had given him. Toby barked as a cat went by the little window adjacent to Daniel's room one day. Daniel was no longer able to hide or mute him. After sharing everything with that puppy and through some difficult nights, Isabella hurried into Daniel's room and discovered what she had always suspected: a dog. She cried out and wanted to harm Daniel once again, but tiny Toby, who had been the only one to support him during that entire time, emerged to stand up for Daniel, biting Isabella's legs and arms in the process. She let out a cry and bolted. After visiting the hospital, Daniel and young Toby contacted Uncle Raphael. When they informed him what had transpired, he and his wife both agreed. Still, he was unconcerned about his little nephew, even if his wife never sought out Daniel. However, Inez, who had seen several tragedies on that ancient continent, was able to find a kind family that helped her out by hiring her to watch a little girl named Mattel. Mattel's father, who worked hard in the business his family left behind, and her grandmother took care of her when her mother passed away when she was a little child. Mattel was ecstatic to have her grandma as a caregiver, and she grew to love her nanny, Inez. After Inez told Mattel about Daniel, Mattel told her father, Juan Carlos, that evening. Because of his demanding job, he had not met the person who brought his daughter such joy, but he was very eager to do so. He made the decision to stay at home one weekend in order to meet Inez, and when he met her, he instantly fell in love since she much reminded him of his late wife. He came to the realization as the days went by that he could not stop thinking about the kind woman who looked after his daughter. He made the decision to get her a ring from the jewelry store. He asked Inez for her hand in marriage over a lavish feast he arranged at one of the best restaurants in the city. She had fallen in love with Juan Carlos, but her son was at a distant place in her heart. Juan Carlos assured her that they would go with young Daniel along. The bad news struck them when they got to Uncle Raphael's house. Daniel and Toby had moved out a few days earlier. Inez was distraught about Daniel's death and frantically raced around, shouting and sobbing. Juan Carlos had to comfort her. Tears were streaming down her face as she noticed a bright light coming from above. Yes, the sun was lowering in the western sky. She suddenly recalled Daniel's assurance that he would always wait for her at that park. Running to that park beside that modest house, she noticed a dog on a sidewalk and a toddler beneath a sidewalk in the distance. With all her strength, she yelled, "Daniel!" Daniel was the one who was overjoyed to see his mother. Knowing what was going on, little Toby was bouncing with joy. Once more, the mother and the kid were together as they had been from the start. They journeyed to far-off Europe, arriving in Madrid, Spain, where they pleasantly settled into a new family: Mattel, Inez, Danielle, Juan Carlos, and of course the wonderful Toby, who was cherished by the family they established. Daniel never had to sleep beneath a bed again since their big, roomy bed was just next to his. Inez recalled what she had spoken when standing on the top floor of that stunning home after the joy that had filled her heart. Yes, she did recall who had looked after Daniel and her. "I appreciate you seeing. Would you kindly like and post the video on social media? We promise to get back to you as soon as we can." When a mother discovered why her son's burial was so green, she sobbed because she couldn't understand it. Whether it's a friend or family member, losing a dear one can cause excruciating agony. Death is an unsettling circumstance that can leave you with more questions than answers, regardless of whether you were acquainted with the deceased for your whole life or their time on Earth was brutally cut short. Finding solace following the loss of a loved one can be challenging. Many individuals just don't know how to handle loss, and healing might take a while if they are processing it alone. Still, there are instances when a stranger's unselfish gesture of compassion may have a profound impact. The death of their son was nearly unbearable for one family. The family was taken aback nonetheless when an additional mourner suddenly reached out in an act of unselfish, pure compassion. This tale of tragedy, kindness, and rekindled hope for mankind will astound you. For Staff Sergeant Joseph Villaseñor, joining the U.S. Air Force fulfilled his lifelong ambition. He enrolled in 1994 and diligently served for 16 years, giving his all to his task. Joseph gave everything he did his all when he was dedicated. Joseph participated in the softball league at the Charleston Air Force Base when he was in the Air Force. He was the epitome of a terrific man to all his fellow troops. Regretfully, 2010 was a year of disaster. Joseph was murdered in an unplanned vehicle accident while he was just 36 years old. His wife and parents, whom he left behind, were horrified by the unfortunate turn of events and decided that Garden Park Cemetery in Conroe, Texas, would be the last resting place for his remains. But when his parents visited his grave one day, they were taken aback by what they discovered, and it was all because of a unique stranger. In 2014, Jake Riesing lost his 65-year wife, and he never fully recovered from her sudden death. He had cherished his marriage to Betty, who had been the embodiment of the ideal spouse. The widower went on to have 9 children and compared his life with his wife to a fairy tale. Her death came as a terrible blow. Even after she passed away, Jake refused to say goodbye and continued to regularly visit her cemetery. But while he was in the cemetery, he also began to do something else that would ultimately affect the lives of another family. For Jake, the same fundamental pattern pervaded his day. Every morning he went to church for prayer. After meeting one of his children for coffee, he returned home to tend to his garden. The retiring senior needed to be occupied. It was his method of managing his loss. He went to Garden Park Cemetery in the afternoon to place some flowers he had plucked from his yard on his wife's tombstone. To ensure that the grass remained lush and green, he even made the extra effort to water the area surrounding the headstone. When friends and family asked why Jake went to the cemetery every day, he gave this heartfelt explanation. Jake handed his wife Betty a rose every day of their 65-year marriage, and he refused to stop the custom even after passing away. But he made the decision to add a new activity to his schedule in 2015. Texas experienced a terrible drought that summer, which killed every blade of grass in the cemetery. The dark grass that surrounded the headstones made for a gloomy appearance, and Jake couldn't stand to watch his wife's last resting place appear so uninspired. Consequently, he devised a fix. Jake started irrigating the grass around his wife's burial. The extra work paid off over time, as the grass once again turned a vivid green color. The elder wanted to do the right thing by his wife, whom he missed much, even though he knew that watering the lawn amid a drought would be looked upon. While on a visit to the cemetery one day, Jake saw a distraught wife weeping at a neighboring gravestone. His heart was warmed by her honest expression of feeling, so he crept over to her in the hopes that he might somehow reassure and soothe her. Following a brief exchange of light conversation, the woman disclosed that she was Joseph Villaseñor's wife and that it had been 5 years since his passing. Together, they were able to offer one other some solace after Jake told her that he had lost his wife the year before. The retired senior made a little gesture, but he was pleased to have made her smile, even if only for a brief while. Even after the woman departed, Jake continued to feel awful for her situation. While she spent only a few brief years with her spouse, he had the chance to have a long life together. Jake felt he had to do her something kind right then. Raymond and Rachel, Joseph's parents, hadn't visited their son's cemetery in a number of months. They made the decision to go to the cemetery and spend some time with their beloved son after realizing they had to put their suffering aside and pay their respects. Upon their arrival, the parents were taken aback to discover something remarkable. Joseph's gravesite had vivid green, lush grass surrounding it. Even though the cemetery was lifeless and drab due to the drought, the bereaved parents were astounded by what they saw and questioned how it was possible. Rachel told the local media, "I told my husband it had to be a miracle from above. What other explanation is there for it?" The parents, however, were about to learn the truth, and it would bring them to tears. The parents were too busy wondering how the grass had survived to see Jake gently walking toward them and grinning broadly. Though Jake had no idea how they would feel about his messing with their son's burial, he hoped they would be grateful. He told them he wanted to offer them a gift and that he had spoken with their daughter-in-law a few months before. He gave an explanation of his own daily schedule for his wife's burial and expressed happiness that he could be of any tiny assistance to the family. Jake disclosed that he had also lost a loved one in the military. His daughter had been married to Benjamin, a U.S. veteran who tragically found out he had cancer. Despite receiving treatment shortly after deployment, he passed away in 2011. Jake believed that watering his son's cemetery would respect his memory after learning that he had served in the military. Jake said, I have a lot of respect for the men and women who have served our nation. I reasoned that by keeping the grass green, the family would be able to cope with their loss and believe that something could still be alive among the dead. It seemed unbelievable to Raymond and Rachel that Jake would make the extra effort to accomplish something so meaningful for their family. With no idea how they would ever be able to pay him back, Rachel just threw her arms around him and wiped away a few tears. Unbeknownst to Rachel and Raymond, Jake and their son Joseph were in fact not strangers, at least not in Jake's view. He believed they had been somewhat spiritually acquainted as they had been caring for and tending to their son's tomb for months. Roger, Jake's son, claims that his father's love for Joseph, whom he now refers to as Joe, is simply who he is as a person. He treats Joe in the same manner that he treated my mother and my brothers. He is a kind man who gives generously to others. Roger was determined that no one would overlook his father's kind deed. Even though his father was a selfless individual who consistently showed compassion without seeking acknowledgement, he desired that, for once, his good nature would be acknowledged. He decided to post his father's tale on Facebook as a result. Roger shared a poignant message about his dad's daily routine and his newfound bond with Joseph, the slain American warrior. He was proud that his father was treating a total stranger like one of his own kids and showing him respect. He continued by emphasizing the value of cherishing each day and loving your family because you never know when they would be taken from you. A month before, 3 armed thieves broke into the workplace of Roger's daughter, nearly taking her life. She wasn't working that day, thank goodness, but he was aware of how disastrous things may have gone. As a grandpa, Jake cultivated close relationships with his grandkids and made a point of setting a good example by demonstrating the healing power of unadulterated love and selflessness. Jake's daughter believes that he and his late wife are still married. She uploaded a photo of her parents during their 6th wedding anniversary when the media took up the tale of her dad's thoughtful act. Mom just lives in heaven. Mom and Dad are still married. If Jake wants others to learn anything from his tale, it's to live life to the fullest and prioritize love above everything else. You never know how one simple act of kindness might have a profound effect on someone's life. This man was served by a waitress every day. When he stopped coming, she received an unexpected call. Being employed in the restaurant business may be challenging. You have to deal with rowdy clients who can cheat you out of a $100 check in addition to spending the entire day on your feet and hurrying about in less than optimal circumstances. Nonetheless, some people find that working as a server is a fulfilling career. One thing that drew customers to server Milena Salazar was her ability to maintain a happy attitude. Milena was always there to serve you with a smile, no matter what obstacles she faced during the day. Her regulars continued coming back because she cared for them like family. Additionally, Milena had a talent for handling difficult clients, even the generally grouchy ones. The traditional sour old man was one of Milena's regulars. He could make Milena's life a living hell, was particular about the food he ate, and constantly critiqued the meals. But she always gave him a grin and a dash of compassion every day. But one day, her sour regular failed to appear at his scheduled hour. Since he never missed a day at the restaurant, Milena was worried about him, so she was taken aback when she read in the paper about some unsettling news. This is an unbelievable tale of a single woman's generosity and unforeseen benefit. Milena Salazar, who worked at Luby's, a Mexican restaurant in Texas, was well known for her prompt service and amiable disposition. Even in situations where things weren't going her way, she made the most of her profession because she liked it. Walter Buck Swords, an 89-year-old veteran noted for his ill-tempered nature and insistence on prompt service and flawless cuisine, was one of Milena's regulars. He held the personnel to the highest standards and had no tolerance for laziness. Fortunately, Milena was game, always satisfying his requests and making sure he had a tasty dinner each and every day. Buck would visit Luby's and take a seat in Milena's area for 7 years. She was aware of his preference for swift service and hot meals. With time, Milena and Buck established an excellent routine, and even with his rough exterior, she consistently showed him compassion. Buck was rough around the edges, but he was 89 and served in World War II, Milena said. espousing the idea that you should treat others as you would like to be treated. I reasoned that he had earned a satisfying lunch and a grin. Buck used to see Milena every day, so when he didn't show up one afternoon, it took her by surprise. She initially dismissed it, thinking he could be ill. But she started to worry when he didn't show up for a few days. Sadly, she had no method of getting in contact with him or his family to inquire about how he was doing. A few days later, Milena saw that Buck had gone away as she was looking through the newspaper. She would never have to deal with the disgruntled client she had grown to adore over the last 7 years again over his heated meal. Gradually, Milena returned to her routine, but there was a big gap in her work week where Buck had been. Even though he had been a tremendous pain in the butt every single day, she came to understand that he actually meant a lot to her. She cherished his company and found solace in the knowledge that he would never leave her. All that was left was emptiness. Though he never said it out loud, Buck had noticed Milena's benevolence without her knowing. Actually, he was pleased with her handling of his demands and grievances. He so made the decision to repay the waitress he had been so fond of over the course of the 7 years, even in death. To put it mildly, Milena's life was about to take a significant turn. Buck loved Milena so much that he included her in his last will and testament, which surprised Milena. Of course, she was completely unprepared for what came next. When Buck's attorneys contacted Milena, they informed her that he had given her $50,000 in addition to his automobile. The waitress was so emotional and completely taken aback. To the best of her abilities, she had just performed her job. Why had this man, who she believed detested everyone, left her with a gift that may change her life? Although Milena thought she wasn't deserving of such a lovely offer, she was grateful that her generosity and patience had been acknowledged. She had never anticipated receiving anything in return for just being kind. But it turned out that smiling may sometimes go a long way, and pay off. Large quantities of money left for servers are not as uncommon as many may believe. In fact, it happens more often than you may imagine. A bonus might be a true godsend for these diligent workers who fight so hard to survive on tips. On the East Coast, at Donahue's Steakhouse in New York City, a like circumstance occurred. When not touring the world, a local art dealer was known to visit the institution. He was well liked by the employees and had a reputation for leaving gratuities for all staff members, including the bussers and cooks. This specific patron was a favorite of co-owner and restaurant waitress, Maureen Donahue. He was quite kind to her and the workers, particularly her niece, who was also employed at the restaurant. The merchant and collector of art was none other than Robert Ellsworth, dubbed the King of Ming. He was regarded as a nice and compassionate man who never thought too highly of himself, and he was worth over $200 million. He lived with an unexpected humility in spite of his wealth. Because of his expertise in Chinese furniture and art from the Ming Dynasty, he went by his common moniker. His most well-known purchase, the Astor Chinese Garden Court, which is presently housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is the result of his extensive global travels in search of rare items from that historical period. Donahue's Steakhouse was like a second home to Ellsworth. He adored the restaurant's sirloin steak covered in grilled onions, and if he were to swing by for supper, he would always have the same dish for lunch, an open-faced grilled cheese with bacon. Ellsworth's dog liked the cuisine there as well, so he would always share his dinner with him. Ellsworth made a special effort to make the restaurant employees feel important and welcomed. In slower times, he would even ask them to sit at his table so he could get to know them better. All in all, he was a wonderful man, and the staff loved having him as a customer. What a 180-degree turnaround for Sour Buck in Texas. Though Ellsworth sadly passed away in 2015, Maureen and her niece each received a very unique bequest from him, $50,000. It would be an understatement to suggest they were taken aback. The two women were in shock that someone could be so generous and provide them with such a blessing. In an interview, Maureen disclosed that she would gladly return the money if it meant seeing him at his usual table. She wishes he to be remembered more for his kindness and charity than his wealth. He was so much more than his status, Maureen said, fighting back tears. He was a friend to everyone at Donahue's. Another blessing that made national news was given to a server at the Sup Dogs restaurant in Greenville, North Carolina. The establishment is well known for its hip atmosphere and lively waitstaff. When eating at this restaurant, you could always bet on having a wonderful time, and one waiter in particular, Elena Custer, stood out. Elena attended nursing studies at East Carolina University during the day and worked at Sup Dogs in the evenings. She was seated at a two-top as soon as she came for her 4 p.m. shift one day, and she welcomed it as usual with a warm grin. From this change quickly shown to be everything from typical. Elena went to get the two men's drink orders and came back to see they had left, but they did leave a whopping $10,000 behind. Elena was first a little hesitant to accept the gesture, believing it to be a practical joke. Custer recalls, "I thought someone was pulling a practical joke on me. I simply answered, 'What?' I wasn't that enthusiastic. 'What is this?' Elena went up to the two men who had cameras at a different table and inquired as to whether it was a practical joke. But all they said was that they were blessed servers that day and that she should subscribe to Mr. Beast's YouTube channel. The gesture brought Elena to tears since she never imagined receiving such generosity. Elena had the option to spend the substantial quantity of money for education, but instead, she decided to use her blessing to help others. She divided the money among the other employees, giving $100 to the people who weren't working that night and $200 to every other server. She believed that the $800 she had left over for herself was more than sufficient. "You know, that could have been anyone on my shift," she remarked to the local media. "I did nothing to earn that kind of money. I intended to divide it up and treat everyone fairly." Customers brought money blessings to 3 separate servers in 3 distinct corners of the nation, but it's their generosity, not the money, that unites them. These ladies made it their mission to promote love and arrived at work smiling, even though they were employed in a demanding field. Being kind to others goes a long way, and you never know who might notice. Did it cause you to? Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.